When I woke up, very confused, she said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an Ironclad original. Hey everybody, welcome to On the X. So today my guest is Chase Jarvis. Chase is an entrepreneur, very successful photographer who's shot for Nike and Red Bull and other big brands out there, and then became an author and has several books on creativity. And he also has a company, had a company that he sold called CreativeLive, which is essentially like a masterclass of sorts without the masters. So it's basically, if you want to learn something that's a creative endeavor, you can go there and just take these courses that teach you how to do anything from sort of music production to art to photography to whatever it is. Chase is a really interesting guy because he started off as someone who probably could have been a professional soccer player, decided he didn't want to do that, and then was accepted to medical school and decided, no, I'm not going to do this, and just kind of burned the boats and said, I think the thing I really love is photography. And went after that and chased that dream and was very successful at it. And I think he's kind of a case study of trying to figure out what you actually want to do in life, what lights you up, and figuring out a way to chase that dream. Pardon the pun there. So his latest book is called Never Play It Safe. And it is about 7 levers that you can utilize in your life to unlock that potential and become more creative and find out what your true calling is. I really enjoyed it. You said Chase's main thing is kind of creativity. I almost think of him as like a creativity expert. So I really enjoyed the conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you did good too. So here we go with Chase Jarvis on the X. So, well, I really want to talk about your book and creativity, because this is kind of your jam. Yep. But let's just give people a little bit of kind of background on you. So you started off thinking you were going to go be a doctor, and then at some point said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go be a photographer instead. So
my poor parents, speaking of parents.
Yeah. But how far along in the process were you? Were you like at medical school?
Been accepted to medical school and was planning on going, had told them that I was, and then bailed essentially before it got started.
And what was it like? What spurred that for you?
Yeah. I think, to be fair, I'm like, you could say that I have had a lot of advantage. I'm white and male and born in America and all of the things. Sure. And yet starting to realize that the things that I wanted in life were different than the things that everybody else wanted for me. At an early age, 2nd grade, Miss Kelly told my parents I wasn't very creative. I was making films and I had a stand-up comedy routine and all this stuff. And she was like, "Hey, look, this dude's a jock. You should just be sports and be good at school. Do good at school."
A terrible thing to say to a kid.
Totally, a 2nd grader. And yet there wasn't a part of me, the 2nd grade Chase didn't go boo-hoo. 2nd grade Chase is like, okay, this is how you fit in. This is what the adults want from me. And I started doing that. And it wasn't until later in life, post-college, where I was realizing that, as we spoke, I went to college on a soccer scholarship at a Division I top 10 school. It was pretty clear that was my path. And when I was realizing that I wasn't that eager to play professionally, the world was like, what are you doing? Of course you do. If you can do that, you do it, and you figure the other stuff out later. And I didn't have the heart. And when you're starting to realize that, okay, well, what else does culture approve of if I do? And it's like, oh, you're a doctor or a lawyer, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll be a doctor. And then you're partway. I'm, $200,000 into debt for student loans and graduate school. On top of that, I was doing a PhD in philosophy at the time and realizing that, oh my God, I'm doing it again. I'm doing the thing that everybody else wants from me. And when, I'm quiet alone staring at the ceiling and realizing that I love, skiing and snowboarding and skating and surfing, and I like taking pictures of that stuff. My grandfather had recently passed away, and it's like, man, wouldn't that be amazing if I could just do that? And And so when I started sharing that little dirty secret with the world, it was just a head scratcher. And yet there was some voice in me that was sort of like 51% courage, 49% fear to start doing the thing that I actually wanted to do. And that meant disappointing a lot of people. That meant leaving school with a bunch of student debt. That meant, a bunch of things that were head scratchers to everybody else, but it was crystal clear to me. And that's when I felt like my life started happening for me rather than to me.
Did you have any kind of photography training or anything before that, or zero?
Zero. Literally
wow.
Zero. And yet I was around it. So as an athlete, I was usually on the other side of the camera. I'd open the after the football game on, Friday night, I'd open the paper Saturday morning and hope to see, pictures of me and my teammates and friends. And my dad was an avid photographer, usually tracking me and my friends playing sports. So I was around it enough to be like, oh man, that's like a moment that's never going to happen again. That's peak action. That is like, it was like a whole narrative in a single image. And, that was intriguing to me. And, and then I was around the media a lot because our school was very good at soccer and I was on the team, reasonably articulate. I would be the person who would be, speaking to the press at the end of the soccer match or whatever. So around it enough for it to pique my interest, but had no experience personally. I just felt that there was some value, some storytelling, something that was intriguing to me. And then my grandpa died and I was given his cameras, and that was sort of the impetus to experiment.
And then, you mentioned being sort of like whatever it was, 50%, 51% excited, 49% fear there.
Terrified. Yeah.
Yeah. Terrified. I would think that granted you're sort of young there, you don't have a family, and,
totally.
And certainly there's a little bit more freedom of maneuver there, but
the world will not have you believe that. The world doesn't tell you that. The world says, what are you doing?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think you're right.
If you can be a pro athlete, you should absolutely do that. Oh, and then second of all, you should definitely go get your advanced degree because that's going to provide for a lifelong. And third of all, photography. How many millionaires do you know that are photographers? How many, and there's all sort of, you've heard the myth of the starving artist. There's just all sorts of cultural narratives that dominate. And the irony, and this is the thing that's, I think, is interesting and will play into any listener. It doesn't matter what it is that you want to do. There's often a sort of a dissonance between what you want and what the world wants for you, regardless of whether you're going to be an athlete or a photographer or whatever. But the thing that's difficult is that the people who are giving you this information, they care deeply about you. And you respect them. They're your parents, your peers, your friends, your career counselor, people who are further ahead in life than you. And the irony of it all, and I want your listeners to pay attention to this, is the people who they care deeply, but the people who are talking you out of your dreams are most likely people who have given up on theirs. Mm-hmm. And so they mean well. And that's what's difficult about making these decisions to double down on the person that you want to be or become. I mean, in this community, like how many people's parents didn't want them to enlist or didn't want them to, to go to the Naval. I was just on the phone with a friend. I said, I'm going on the Navy SEAL Foundation podcast. He's like, man, I almost went to the Naval Academy. And he told me a story that's very similar to the one that I'm sharing with you. And it's just, it's a dominant cultural narrative that we don't talk about because there's other stuff to talk about, but it's real. Like when you want to do something, the world has got a really clear picture of what you should be doing. And you carving your own path is, I think, one of the most urgent and important tasks before us.
Yeah. How did you do that successfully? Like, how did you, what did you do?
At first as I said, it wasn't like, it was really obvious that this is the thing I'm need to go do and everyone else be damned. It was quite the opposite. As I mentioned, it's 51%. Man, I have done this stuff before, the stuff that other people want me to do. Go back to second grade Miss Kelly, or, this idea of becoming a photographer instead of a doctor or a pro athlete. And there was something there. There's something that's like, I actually was lit up by the fact that I know in my heart I want to do something that's slightly different. And it was a whisper. It wasn't a screaming from the mountaintops. 1% more courageous than fearful. And when you do that and it works, you're like, oh man, this intuition that we all have very deep inside us, that the world will pile a bunch of, layers on. When you listen to it once and it works, you're like, man, there's something there. And there's a little, like an intimation of a path. There's a little bit, again, it's 52% courage, 48% fear in that moment. And this is how we develop this muscle. Our intuition is there for a reason. And the science is actually pretty clear. Ironically, we've been programmed to believe that rational thought is infallible, it's durable, it's all these things. And yet, relative to intuition, it's pretty slow. It's kind of clunky. It's often wrong. Our mind fills in all these things that we thought we saw. Take into account the eyewitness of a crime. People see wildly different things and they are certain that they saw them.
Yep. 100%.
So all that stuff is really actually weak. And what's powerful and strong is our intuition. It's one of the most powerful things that we know the least about. And yet science is understanding that this is why it's a gut. Like our cells have some sort of memory of the experience that we have and are connected deeply inside us. And that when we start to manifest those things in the world, again, as I mentioned before, that's when the world starts happening for you rather than to you. And it's a muscle, just like anything else. You got great biceps. Those didn't just happen. You developed them, you worked them. And the same is true with our intuition. The reality is that it's actually natural for us to be intuitive. The world trains it out of us. And then when those folks, ironically, these are the people that be the happiest, the most successful and fulfilled people, when they start to pay attention to that intuition that says, take the path that only you can walk. That's when like, wow, it actually works. So that's all I did. It wasn't some bravery, it was just, I was just 1%. And then when you did that, I was like, okay, now I'm 2%. Oh, wow. And I built momentum in my life around paying attention to that voice inside. And I think that's available to everyone.
That balance you're talking about sort of, or that interplay between intuition and kind of rational thinking is something I think about a lot, which is, I think I used to be somebody who very much leaned into rational thinking, very empirical, very, not necessarily linear. I mean, I can think abstractly, but just very much like almost stoic to a fault. Yeah. And intuition is something that as I get older, I've started to try to pay more attention to. Like, what does my gut tell me on this? Yeah. The thing I always get stuck on is intuition's not always right. Sometimes it's wrong. And so where do you strike the balance there? Because it's hard, because as soon as you question intuition, you're being rational again. Right. Totally. And so it's that, like, when am I leaning into my prefrontal cortex versus my sort of limbic system or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, do you have a kind of a thought on that of like when it makes sense to default to one over the other?
I think it's difficult to say that intuition is wrong because you might just get the time horizon incorrect. Okay. And I do think that the empirical evidence, if you're looking for it in that rational part of it, is literally deconstruct the greatest in any discipline on the world, the greatest athletes, the greatest thinkers, Einstein with science, Maya Angelou with writing. Like, it doesn't matter. Go anywhere you need to go. And there's something that is different about those people. And it's not that they are better rational thinkers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, this is sort of my mission is not dissimilar to yours. I'm like, man, so, and again, the title of my latest book is called Never Play It Safe. And, it's sort of empirically, I deconstructed all of the best stuff in my life. And what I knew to be true was that all of that stuff was on the other side of my comfort zone, all of it. And someone says like, oh, well, I don't know, snuggling with my kiddos is just, that's on this side of my comfort zone. It's like, well, deciding to have kids, how was that? That was probably a pretty big decision. So that's what I mean. Like, I don't have any examples, and I still to this day can't, that the best stuff is on the other side of our comfort zone. So what I wanted to do is deconstruct the lives of people around me who I thought were either, normal people living extraordinary lives or the highest performers in the world, And the same was true for them. So then I started looking at like, okay, well, what would it look like if we created a blueprint to regularly get to the best stuff in life? That ended up becoming this book.
Yeah.
And it led me down a lot of the paths that we're discussing right now. Like, okay, so, you know, how powerful is this intuition stuff? Like, listen to Michael Jordan talk about playing basketball. He talks about it, seeing the entire court in slow motion, right? He talked about visualization. He talked about his experience of repetition, you know, of mastery of the subject, of shooting free throws, and mechanics. And it has a sort of a very amorphic sort of spiritual side that there's some rational foundational things like building a training schedule and, you know, ingraining these skills so that they become habits, all of these things. But ultimately it is very amorphous. And what you develop when we're talking about, say, intuition is, you know, a picture, a metaphor that I like is a bird doesn't land on a branch hoping that the branch doesn't break. A bird lands on the branch, any branch, knowing that it can fly away if that branch does break.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the same thing. Like we are training, we ought to train. I mean, this is the like a warrior spirit, right? You train for anything so that when anything does come along, you are in the moment, you have the resources, the capabilities to take care of yourself. Now just look at that whole ecosystem through the lens of that you actually do have the information inside you. What would it be like if you were quiet enough, still enough to pay attention to that, to develop your skills in the direction that A, in the direction of your dreams, and B, in such a way that people can't take that away from you, that you can be who you are in any moment, that you can be successful, happy, fulfilled, regardless of what's happening around you.
On the X is brought to you by Mechanix Wear. Mechanix Wear gloves are kind of the go-to glove, I think, for most people out there, whether it's working around the house or on the job or some kind of tactical setting. That's certainly been the case for me throughout my life. And they've made a whole bunch of improvements to the gloves that they have out there. So they've got the kind of original series here with the Velcro backing, Velcro close that most people can use in sort of everyday settings, very ubiquitous for various things that you might want to do. Then they've got these fast fit ones, which you essentially just slide on. There's a little loop there around the wrist where you can pull them on. And then they've got the Impact series, which has a reinforced backing to protect your knuckles. And then they've got this lock ring reinforcement around the thumb now, where there's a lot of wear and tear. There's a whole bunch of other improvements to these. And if you go to their website, they literally have a 5 to 7 minute video about each one of these sets of gloves and all the improvements they've made, from the material, reducing the seams, making them more reinforced, making them more moisture wicking. It's clear that they put a lot of care and attention into their gloves. And if you listen to the guy talk on the website, they really love gloves. And I think that that comes out in everything they do. When I'm going out to a hardware store and I'm looking for some gloves, I almost look at everything else as just kind of a cheap knockoff. So definitely my go-to glove, highly recommended. Mechanix Wear gloves, they're available at most retailers on mechanixwear.com and GSA Advantage, and they're proud to offer an exclusive 15% off discount through the ID.me program to military veterans and first responders. So check them out. So let's get into these.
Sure.
Because I love that. I love the structure you set up in this, where you have these kind of 7 levers that you go through, which essentially are like, hey, these are the levers to pull to kind of unlock this for yourself.
Yes.
Right. That's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to that, though, I have one other kind of question to sort of frame this up, which is,
sure.
So, you know, this is something for you where, like I said, you were young, single, like, okay, I'm going to torch the boats and I'm going in this direction, you know, fuck you guys, whatever.
Yep.
Right. And, but there's a lot of people who they've spent a lot of time in a career and they're older and they have families and they're thinking to themselves, okay, a couple things. One, I'm even more terrified because if I do this, and I don't have a livelihood potentially, like how do I provide for my family, that kind of thing. But then the other thing is, I think people have there's probably a lot of people who their identity is so locked into what they've done for so long where they don't even know what their passion is. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you ask them, well, what would you really want to do if, like, money wasn't an object or anything? I think there's a lot of people that would go, I don't know.
Totally.
So how do you know? Is it like lean into these levers for that?
Sure. Well, you are asking a very thoughtful and comprehensive question. So I'm going to try and sort of like talk around it for a little bit, and then we'll have the essence of an answer in a half a dozen different pieces that can go together in different ways, which I think that's actually the most interesting way of A, thinking about it. Clearly, I like how you think, and B, it's actually really constructive because we can get this. So first of all, for the people that say, I don't know what it is that I actually love. If I could snap my fingers, because I've been doing this thing, I've been in this mode so long.
Yep.
Well, that's okay. You're neurologically wired for that. The neurons that wire together. The more things you do, it's like water. They're ruts in your mind. So changing that is difficult. And my previous book was a book called Creative Calling. Actually, I got a copy of it right here. It looks like this. And there are 4 parts to that book. It's essentially a creative process. And whoever's thinking that right now, like, oh, well, I'm not interested in painting. Creativity is much larger than painting. Art is a little subset of it. And right now we're creating this conversation. You're creating your life, for example. So the first stage in creativity is that the acronym is is IDEA. Imagine, design, execute, amplify. Yep. The imagine part of what we want for ourselves is the hardest part. So to be clear, whoever is stuck right now thinking like, I don't even know where to start. The cool part is that as soon as you start to excavate it, it's right there. Success leaves clues. When in your life have you felt the most alive? What were you doing? Who were you with? Remember that thing you did as a kid that lit you up? What are some things that look and feel and smell like that right now? What if you didn't have to drop everything and go become a Lego expert, but that you actually just looked there, you chased your curiosity? There's something there regardless of what level it is. And the goal isn't to try and solve this all by sitting on the couch at one fell swoop. The goal is to actually just move in the direction of your curiosity. So that's where answers are. Success leaves clues. What did you like as a kid? What do who lights you up? What makes you feel expanded rather than contracted? And if you don't have time for this, or this is not interesting to you, let me just remind you of unequivocally the number one regret of the dying is that they lived a life that wasn't intentional, that was based on other people's ambitions and desires for them rather than their own. This is not like a nice to have, or this is not a number 2, 6, or 11. This is the number one regret of people on their deathbed.
For sure.
So this is sort of that ought to be the reminder that actually doing things that you want with this one precious life is meaningful. For those then who are, so I'm going to assume that I've hooked you there. Then you say you don't know, but you really do. And then second of all, you say, well, I've got all these constraints. I've got a mortgage. I've got 3 kids. I've got fill in the blank. Well, in my latest book, and one of these 7 levers is the tool of constraint. You think those constraints are keeping you down. That is a story that you've told yourself. Yet on the battlefield with some duct tape and some household bleach, you're like, whatever, I got these things and I'm going to do something with these things. And the same is true with your life. All of those things that you see as the things that are holding you back, your mortgage, your job, your, the family, however many kids you have, whatever, in there is a solution. And doing something instead of nothing in the direction of your dreams is incredibly valuable. And what we believe, the cultural narrative, is that we have to see the whole staircase, and it couldn't be further from the truth. All you need to see is the first couple of steps. Mm-hmm. And it's in walking the path that the path reveals itself.
Yep. I have so many questions just about creativity that I want to get to too. But
sure,
let's go through the levers, because I think that's really important. That's top of mind. That's like, top of content for you too. So
sure.
So the first one is attention. And are we talking about like internal attention, sort of, paying attention to the narrative, the chatter, so to speak, that kind of stuff, lacking, getting away from multitasking, flow state? Is that kind of where we're going with this?
Yeah. So Yeah. And the punchline there is that your attention, first of all, you have the capability, the capacity to decide what you pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Your attention has been hijacked, which is why it feels like a cork in the tide and why you feel split between, I got the kids and my phone and my job and that is just a conditioning of being in late stage Western modern capitalism. You have a choice, and the ability to direct your attention is the most important choice that you make every day. And there's a great story I tell in the book about Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl, he wrote a famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was in arguably the most horrific of conditions you could imagine. He was in a concentration camp in World War II. And in 1945, his ability to focus his attention on the things that actually mattered, not the condition of his experience, not the conditions that he was in, but the experience that he was having, and the ability for him to help others. To be fair, he was a PhD in psychology, he was a professional, so he was trained in this. But his ability to choose what he focused on in that moment, it's a very stoic virtue, right? You can't control what happens to you, but you can control your attitude about that. The definition is that you experience a life that you pay attention to. Quick example, look around the room, see how many blue things you see. Just take 10 seconds. Look around. There's the book cover behind me. There's a little blue in that, and the shirt on this thing, there's a little blue on the, and then I ask, how many red things did you see? You have no idea because you were paying attention to blue. So you get the experience of blue and not red. It's not that red wasn't there. So by extension, your life is directly proportional to what you pay attention to. And that with some practice and effort is 100% controllable. You are not the thing between your ears. You are the person, you are the being that is able to look at your thoughts, look at the thing between your ears, might as well decide how to direct it. And that is where things like meditation, awareness, prayer, a lot of those practices are born. It's absolutely critical. And this is, popular culture, just scan popular culture. My friend Tim Ferriss, great guy, probably known by some of your audience.
For sure.
In both of, and dear friend, and I'm in a couple of those books, Tools for Titans and what is the other one? Tribe of Mentors. And when you asked him, as I have, what's the common thread amongst the hundreds of people that you feature on your podcast and those books, the number one most common attribute is some sort of an awareness practice, meditation, mindfulness. 100%. Yeah. And so again, just look at the data. You're like, okay, that it turns out is really important. Choosing then not to develop your practice or your skills and paying attention, you're doing yourself a big disservice.
Yeah. And it's really, though, it is then the applicability of that to the rest of your life, right? So the meditation practice is so necessary. I completely in agreement with you. But then it is to the point of things pulling away your attention, right? There are things that come at us that no matter what we do, it's coming at us and we have to choose, am I paying attention to this or not? But then we spend so much time choosing to distract ourselves by
for sure
pulling up a social media feed and scrolling through it and then stopping on something that's oh, screw that guy. Literally something that has nothing to do with you
at all,
that was not part of your life 10 seconds ago that you brought in and then decided to engage with, where it's
and to think about leaving a comment and then, how long, how much time evaporates in that. So it's both, right? Learning to direct your attention in the way that we're talking about, by choosing the response in between stimulus and response is the choice to make a decision of how you want to show up. And then the second one is there's a bunch of stuff that is competing for that attention. Welcome late stage Western capitalism, that if you get good at managing your attention, and ironically, the next chapter is time.
Right. I was going to say, just go right into
it. It goes right into it. And then you'll start to see all these things are very interrelated.
Of course.
That, it turns out that the people who don't give away their attention to, some social media whose job it is to literally hijack you and program you into thinking certain things based on what it shows you, then boy, you're at a dramatic advantage over the rest of the world. A, I'm choosing how I show up, and B, I'm deciding that I'm not going to let someone else's petition on my life drive where I direct my attention. that automatically gives you more time for the person who's saying, I can't possibly conceive of shifting careers because I'm already maxed out. Do a time audit. And you're like, yes, it's true. I have 3 kids, and it's true. I have 2 jobs, and it's true. And what if that is changeable? Turns out most of it is. It's not like you're going to run from your family, and you probably are doom scrolling, and you probably can get up earlier. You probably can go to bed later. You probably can rearrange elements of your life such that you can get closer, move in the direction of your dreams. And there's 2 really important things that I want to talk about with time. This was very difficult to write about, but I think it's profound. Most of us are time billionaires, which means we have 31 years. What is it? I think it's a billion minutes.
Yeah. You talk about this, right? From the
yes. And just like
at least left in our lives, right?
Yeah. Statistically, the number of people who are listening to this based on people who listen to podcasts, et cetera. And yet we don't behave like it. And culture doesn't make us feel any better about that. If you're 23 and you don't know what you want to do or where you want to go in life, the world is like, what are you talking about? And yet it makes us do so much stupid shit running around trying to feel like we have to have it all figured out. What if you actually, and this is, catastrophic thinking for so many people, like live for the moment, carpe diem. And I'm not saying it's, I'm advocating for short-term urgency. When you know the things that you want to do and be and become in your life, great, do those things. But if you don't know, if we stopped freaking out, it's the freaking out that makes us do so much stupid shit and just take the thing that comes along. And the irony is when you start listening to your intuition, everyone who's listening right now has experienced flow state where you sat down to do something and you got more done in a single sitting than you've ever done in your, whether you're a writer or anything. You're like, oh my gosh, that is available to us all of the time. The way that you do that, and the way the smartest, the best thinkers, the people who have mastered this, the way that they do that is by doing things that they love with people that they love. It turns out this actually has an effect on how we experience time. And when we've all had to do shit we don't love, think of how brutal time is when you're doing that. Mm-hmm. And so the opposite, therefore, it's not a stretch to think that, oh man, this really is a way of dilating time. And it's, if you do that in lightweight ways all the time, you'd be surprised how you experience your life differently. And this is a secret that the happiest, most successful and fulfilled people, they know. They have, a billionaire's calendar is not necessarily empty because they're a billionaire. They're a billionaire because their calendar was empty. They allowed themselves space to operate. They gave themselves the grace of being able to go down a path and realize that it was the wrong path. So you start to see how the things like time and attention are related. And then the third lever is intuition, which we've already talked about at some length, right? And you start to see how these things all play together. It's like, man, there's actually something here.
Ironclad creates world-class visuals that resonate anywhere. We thrive on crafting content that captures the essence of your brand in any setting. Why blend in when you can stand out? Ready to take your message to the next level? Start your journey with us at ironcladagency.com. Let's make your vision a reality anywhere and everywhere.
Just on the time thing real quick, this is something that I think about, where walking the right line of doing a lot, but not getting where there's a piece of kind of the zeitgeist these days, which is just basically like do more. It's like optimize everything and get more done and get, wake up, do a cold plunge and then get in red light therapy and stare at the sun and optimize your food and then get your meditation in. And you know what I'm saying? Where it's sort of,
it's
like,
all very tidy. The list of shit to do is very tidy and it's long.
Right. And at the same time, make sure you're extending your life too, right? So get all wrapped up into longevity because you want, we all want to live to be 120 now. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, I don't know that I'm buying into that 100%. Like, I get it. We should be sort of focused on, to your point, what do we actually want to do? How do we actually want to spend our time? But where it used to be sort of he who dies with the most toys wins, I feel like we're getting into he who dies doing the most wins. And I don't think I quite agree with that necessarily. I sort of feel like there's a place where you are sacrificing. There's a bunch of things going on, but there's a place where you're sacrificing living for surviving, for sure, where it's like it becomes a survival thing. But there's also this just like, I don't know that it's just about cramming more shit into every single day to say, I did the most shit today, right?
It can't be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like we empirically, that just sounds like the truth hits different, right? When you hear it, it sounds different. And that just sounds untrue.
Yeah.
Right. Who dies with the most shit wins. Because if you talk to anyone who has been to the mountaintop, as they say, what happens when they get there? Ask any of them. They're like, shit. I felt just as I felt excited for about a week. And then just like clockwork, I went right back to feeling a lack, any sort of external award. And a lot of people who are listening, they're high achievers, right? And you know this to be true. How long did the satisfaction last before you had to reframe another goal in order to feel worthy, in order to feel whole? And this is not about not achieving. This is not about not succeeding, but it's just placing an appropriate weight on there. Go back to your sort of like the providing. Sure, creating resources in abundance is valuable, and it cannot possibly be everything.
Yeah.
And this is sort of why the time chapter was really interesting for me to learn about and write about. And what it ultimately boils down to is it goes back to the attention and the presence, your ability to be present and aware. Just think of it, present with your kids.
Yep.
Right. That how special does that feel?
Right.
And there's not a single billionaire who, if you ask them at the end of their life, would you trade all of your money to be 20?
Yep.
Every single one of them would say yes.
Yep.
And,
absolutely. Yes.
Right. And that's proof in the pudding right there that what you want is life, is presence. And there's a thing in game theory. There are two games. One is basically a finite game, and the other is an infinite game.
Yep.
And when we're playing finite games, there's winners and losers. But life is certainly not a finite game, and it can't be measured as such, which is how we're talking about achievement as a measurement. And what we're really seeking in this moment, and what we're talking about here in this book, and I think your show really epitomizes this, is we want to be playing an infinite game. The goal is to keep playing with people we love, doing things that we love, in a world that we love, where we can choose our experiences. Yes. And when we can respond favorably and thoughtfully and with integrity to the things that happen to us. Hard things happen to great people all the time. But if we could choose how we show up in those times, that's meaningful. It's unequivocal. Like, it's very hard. I don't know anyone who really throws that under the bus and says no to any of those things. And that's
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of, this was what I was imagining when I was understanding, like, what are the 7 essential tools to a life you love? And that's, how I got to some of the ones we're talking about.
Yeah. And this is something, this whole, the kind of time thing is just something, just to stick on it a little bit, is something that I feel like I only recently kind of figured out. Not that I'm doing it perfectly all the time, but going from go all the time to, okay, I have a fixed window here where I'm not going to multitask. To your point, I'm focused on this. I'm 100% attention to this. By doing that, to your point, like, hopefully kind of flow into it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then the in-between moments, slowing stuff down and being more intentional actually is, I was thinking, I think I was talking to Steve Magnus or something, and there was a couple things that came up. One was this quote from the movie Dune, where the guy's like, hey, look, life is not I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, life is not a mystery to be solved. It's a process to engage with or flow with, right? Which is, I think is, yes, right? We're not trying to win here. We're trying to make the process better. And then what was the other? I was on a different podcast just talking about the tortoise and the hare, right? The old fable about the tortoise and the hare. And it's like, who wins the race there? It's the tortoise, because he's just like, okay, cruising along, instead of like burn out, right? And I think that's
For sure.
a really valuable lesson. That
It's crazy. It's crazy wise. And I really like the number of people who became extra present and moved thoughtfully and gracefully through time and said, you know what? Fuck it. This is wrong. Versus the number of people who did everything and realized, oh my God, this is not the way to live, which is just, there's just 1,000 stories. Think of all the high performance podcasts. You talk to anyone who's actually a high performer, you strip away the accolades and the watch and the jet and the stuff. And they're like, man, I just want to have presence with my kids, you know, get into experiences and adventures that I realize are so special. How can I be with my own thoughts?
Yep.
That's the work that all those people end up doing later in life. And it's not an accident. And I don't know a lot of monks that are like, God, I just did my whole, like this 30, 40 years as a monk thing. And I'm like, man, I really wish I had a better watch.
Yeah, right. That's right.
It never goes that way. And so like, as I say that, you know, success leaves clues, and we don't have to touch the stove to know it's hot. We can ask others. We can genuinely, you know, harvest the experience of others. Certainly we need to find some things out about ourselves, but I'm betting that the people who are listening or watching right now have experienced the shit that I'm talking about, and I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And when you deconstruct the lives of people like you who are listening to this right now, these things that I'm saying are truths. You know, I did a ton of research, and honestly, like I don't share this that often, but I was, you know, 5 years actively researching, 13 months into writing, and I threw all of the manuscript away. I was basically had a completed book, because the book that we're talking about right now, the one that says that this is the hard stuff of life, versus the would sell really well, a nice book at the intersection of creativity and business, which is what I had been writing. I threw it all in the trash, because to me, I just couldn't unsee it when you strip away all of the stuff of the best experiences in my life on the other side of my comfort zone, the best experiences from all of my friends who are high performers, the people who I respect and admire and appreciate, who've been through the fire. It all comes down to some alchemy of these 7 levers, and how you manipulate and how you manage those is it's difficult to argue with.
So let's go to the 4th one here, because what's interesting to me is you go from attention, time, intuition. All those words strike me as either neutral, or I would say leaning positive in terms of some kind of connotation, right? But then the 4th one is constraints, which is sort of like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that.
Put that very strategically in the middle when you just started feeling like, oh yeah, I feel pretty good. But there's a lot of people who are at this point in the book and at this point in our conversation, to be frank, that are saying, yeah, this sounds like a lot. I can't do it because of A, B, C, and D. These are all stories we tell ourselves. And to your point about wanting to talk about creativity, you give an artist a blank canvas, or you give a writer no prompts. That's terrifying. But if I give you a set of constraints, the painting has to be of these colors. The book has to be, you know, the essay has to be this long. I give it to a carpenter. You have to make it out of this kind of wood, and you have this many linear board feet, and it has to do this, this, and this. Instantly, the human mind comes alive. And this is part of the thing that we've been talked about right now, or culturally. Like, we've been talked out of the fact that all of these constraints that you have, your bank account, the amount of time that you have, the jobs you have, the family structure, that whatever, that those are all negatives. And the benefit to listening to this right now is that's where the answers are. Those constraints are not there to keep you down. Those constraints are there to shape your response. And
I love this.
Starting to see that for what it is will give you all of the personal power that you are currently giving away.
Yep. I love it. I'm big on that.
It's fact, right? It's fact. It's like, you give me a situation and I can tell you how the thing that you think is keeping you down is an asset.
So let's go.
I don't know how Jocko is perceived or is received in your audience, but I wrote a little bit about.
He's in there. That's right. Yep.
Yeah. You know, just write about when things go wrong. It's like good.
Yes. He's got the whole good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
which is
good.
great advice. It is great advice.
Yeah, which is great advice. So, what is it that we can learn from those things? And by extension, well, I have this constraint and this constraint and this constraint. Good. Because you have to think of a solution that fits those constraints. And that is where human creativity is at its peak. So lucky you.
I love that idea too, because it's something that I hadn't really thought about before, which is, I like that analogy you have of, if you give somebody a blank canvas, it's like, ooh, what do I do with this? But if you're like, here's a blank canvas, you only can use, to your point, these two colors, this, it's gotta have this kind of shape or whatever. It's gotta be some kind of, some parameter that you put in there.
Yep.
It sort of unlocks a creativity there, because you're forced to think, okay, how do I work within those parameters, right?
Yeah. Constraints create creativity.
Yeah.
It's really counterintuitive. And that's, again, most of this advice, right, is counterintuitive. In the book, I talk about, let's go back to time. I say, what if life was long? Again, most of us who are listening are billionaires. We have 31 or more years, which is a billion minutes, and billion seconds, I think. We might live till we're 850 years old.
Yeah.
But, and it's like, it's counterintuitive to think of, wow, I'm on my third or fourth career arc. And it was only because I stopped scurrying around when I was 23, when everyone else wanted me to do, that I felt less than and lacking, and I'm never going to get it all in. I'm never going to be able to do it all. And then I started just experimenting and like being able to quiet all the noise and listen. And I'm like, man, I got time. And again, we want to juxtapose that with sort of long-term patience, short-term urgency. But intuition is the same. It's very counterintuitive. Constraints, the fact that constraints are actually creating the path. There's a Stoic saying that the obstacle is the way.
Right.
My friend Ryan Holidays wrote about that very elegantly as a book about that. It's like, it's in the challenge that the opportunity presents itself.
Right. So let's pause a little bit just on creativity, because this is kind of your jam, right?
It is
creativity itself, and kind of, and I've heard you say it's not a skill. And I think there's a lot of people out there that feel like you're born with you're either born a creative person or you're not, right? There's almost very binary about it. Like, I'm either, that guy's really creative, or I'm just not that creative kind of thing.
Creative, or I'm not creative, or what I do is not creative.
Right.
Yeah,
right. So what's your cut on that in terms of that being an innate ability versus something we cultivate? And then how do we cultivate it outside of some of this other stuff, right? Like establishing constraints or whatever.
Yeah. First of all, it's very easy to prove you wrong if you believe that there are creative people and not creative people. Go to any first grade classroom. Who wants to come to the front of the picture or front of the room and draw me a picture? Every hand goes up.
Yeah.
Or if I hand you a pen or a crayon and you have a blank piece of paper, what kid who's 6 doesn't start scribbling? 0.
Right.
0 kids. And then you do that same experiment in 6th grade and then again in 10th grade. And it's very clear to see that this is an innate thing that's been trained out of us. And ironically, Chris, your question, it's like all of these tools that are in Never Play It Safe are those that reside naturally within us. Culture talks us out of them. And this is a process of going in, of rediscovering the things that we already knew. Creativity is the same thing, right? It is innate in us. You can see it very clearly. All you have to do is look at any first grade classroom. And then when you start to realize that's a thing that we're talked out of, and that you don't actually need to wear a beret, become a painter, move to France to have access to any of this stuff. And then there's an accountant saying, well, I'm an accountant. And I would agree that the government probably frowns on creative accounting. But the belief that that's not creative is entirely false, right? Because let's look at a very fundamental definition of creativity, taking 2 or more things and combining them in new and novel ways to make something or do something that has value.
Yep.
And value, obviously that's a very loose term. You can ascribe value to a lot of things. It's useful. It's new and useful. And if you can expand the definition of creativity, right? Art is just a tiny little subset of creativity. We are co-creating this conversation right now. You're deciding what to say. It's sort of like we're in a jam session. If we were musicians, you're going to talk, I'm going to talk, you're going to talk more, I'm going to interrupt you because I have, it's a very creative process. And if you can start to think that all of this stuff, anytime I'm showing up in the world, I have a chance to impact the outcome. That's creativity. The lives of the people that you look up to, respect, and admire, whether your next door neighbor, someone on the internet, your cultural hero, the life that they are creating is created. It didn't happen on accident. They're having an active role in it. And so once you can start to look at creativity, expand the definition from popsicle sticks and glitter to creating your life, it starts to get interesting. And that's when people can like, okay, I can care about this. This isn't what color, socks am I going to wear today? I am choosing what the outcome of my life ought to be. And the work that I put in has a direct impact on that outcome. That's when things get interesting.
Do you think that so what is it that like makes people think, well, I'm not creative? Is it just some adult that says, hey, you're really creative. You should keep doing that. Is it the same thing as the
it's
soccer or whatever, any of these things where, hey, you're really good at that. You're not, you shouldn't do it anymore. Is it that?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it is because we have just gone through a revolution, the industrial and several revolutions, most recently the one that was largely based on the factory and the farm, right? The workday, the skill that you learn, and that was useful for a while, but we have currently outplayed. That's not to say that factories aren't valuable, but we're in an era where the ability to solve problems, the ability to think on your feet, the ability to be adaptable is unquestionably more valuable than to only have one skill. Mm-hmm. Learning how you learn. Totally.
Problem solving.
Right. And
huge,
problem solving, right? Problem solving.
Yes.
In any discipline.
Yeah. If I'm hiring people for a company, I want people that are problem solvers.
Absolutely.
Almost above. I want people of integrity. That's probably the number one thing. But right below that, I think is not skill set or experience or anything like that. It is the ability to problem solve, for sure.
And that is creativity, because you're looking at you're looking for a solution in a universe where there currently isn't one. There is a problem, and it's your job to come up with the solution. That, if it's not the definition of creativity, is really, really close. People cheer for innovation, but what is innovation if it's not creativity applied? So I'm going to assume that I've hooked you, that okay, I believe this creativity stuff. Let's go back to your point that you said it's not a skill. It's a habit. This is a way of operating in the world. It's a way of believing that I am a creative person. I am a problem solver. And if placed with some constraints, see the earlier point, I can, through tiny experiments, a willingness to fail, and the belief that if I'm given enough opportunity that I will be able to find my way out, over, through, around, those are the habits that we want to get in when, again, go back to the bird. The bird doesn't land on the branch hoping the branch doesn't break. The bird lands on the branch knowing that it can fly away if it does. And that is a creative experience.
The last three here, I'm going to try to wrap them up together a little bit so we can kind of talk about them all contextually in kind of one go here.
Sure.
Play, failure, and practice. So first of all, I'm really big on kind of these concepts, specifically the sort of skill building kind of idea in terms of mental fitness and what it can do for us and make us kind of, because I feel like a lot of people out there, they get older and they lose a hobby. They lose something that's, even if it's not their next thing they want to go do in the world, it's like they lose something that's just fun, that they enjoy doing, whether it's a musical instrument or woodworking or, martial art or whatever it may be. Right. And so I'm big in people incorporating this into their lives, where I kind of, not struggle, but try to figure out like what the right balance is. So let's say you've got something that you're working on that's like a skill like that, like a musical instrument, right? I've never played guitar before or something, and I want to play. There's a piece of that is like the practice component. I'm going to build this skill. I need to learn how to do this. But that can get boring and tedious at times and feel like work. And so at some point when you're good enough at it, you need the sort of like the free play part of it too. That just like, hey, just have fun. And this is, we talked about Charlie Dohn. This is Charlie's thing, the play, right? Like that piece. And then tied in with that is failure, because like, as you're learning anything, it's about failing over and over. Right? I'm trying to learn piano and I've been doing it for about 5 years now. So I can play some stuff, but every time I sit down at the piano, it's basically like trying fail, try, fail until at some point you can do it. Right. So I guess what I'm asking with this is, with these things, these levers, is like the amount of energy and like time you put on each one, right? Because I specifically think of like a skill where it's like, how much should I practice and how much should I play, so to speak, with it, right?
Yep. Can you make them the same? Can you make your practice playful? There's no question that the best in the world, look at Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry. I mean, how playful is Steph Curry? He's shooting free throws, but he's doing behind the back stuff, you know, from the top, from the third floor of he's entertaining at the same time. He's entertaining himself. And yet they still show up at 5 a.m. before other people. They're doing their drills, and that they have decided that they are going to love the process of what they are doing. Yeah. Not the outcome, not the end result.
100%.
And you see this professional golfers, professional artists, like you see, if you can begin to love the process, as in literally find joy in either the process or your experience of the process. Like, how does it make you feel when you're in that process? Like that is the ticket to greatness, first of all. And I'm a huge process person, and the interrelate, and it's not an accident that these are like play, failure, and practice are the last 3 levers in this book, and they're all super tightly correlated, right? The person who loves the process of practice and can do so playfully, failures don't feel like failures, they feel like learning opportunities, and you actually have to fail a number of times. So if I told you if you asked 10 people for $1 billion, the 11th person's going to give you $1 billion. How fast would you go through and ask 10 people for $1 billion? Yep. You'd want to go through that as fast as possible. That's akin to people who are the best in the world. They will relish in moving through something such that they can learn the behavior and then create the habit that is creativity, not the skill, that they're approaching all of this, how it all relates to one another. The punchlines here are: reframe failures as tiny experiments. Like, you don't know if you can play I'm just going to sit down today and run a tiny experiment. How am I showing up? And I'm going to find joy in the sounds that I do make. And when I make a mistake, that's part of the process, right? And then practice. Do I love the process? Well, you should try and focus on things that you love. If there's things that you hate, look, that's fair. We all have to do things beyond just the things we love. But if you're really going to think about moving in the direction of your dreams with your life, spending more time doing things you love with people you love, turns out that's really valuable. That's the people who live a long time. That's the people who are healthy and are not constantly fighting disease. That's the people who experience time differently. These things are all very tightly correlated. And that's why it's a yes and that's why there's also only 7. There's not 84 levers. Right. It's pretty, when you start to wrap your arms, your mind, your head, and your heart around these things, you can bring play to anything. Anyone watching or listening right now, you could name the thing that you hate the most: unloading the dishwasher. Yeah. What if you showed up and you said, I didn't have to wash the dishes. There is a thing. There's a machine that lives in my house that washes all of the dishes. Yeah. And what if, when you just started paying attention to your senses, you open that and that beautiful smell of, that fresh fragrance of clean dishes, and then the heat. It's the heat, right? That's what I like. Exactly. But the point is that you can actually apply that to anything, point being earlier, Viktor Frankl. You can choose your experience. What if you chose for it to be playful and joyful? Yeah. What if you realize that failure has to sting a little bit? The science of failure is interesting, but it has to sting a little bit, and you have to be willing to adapt. Like, that's the benefit of failure. Everyone who is a winner was a loser first. Deshaun Wang, who researched this, I think at University of Chicago, was very clear. Every winner starts out a loser. This willingness to look funny in front of your friends is a really key attribute of being successful at anything. like you start to look at this stuff and you can squint just here on the podcast and you can, okay, I believe that somewhere there is a path. And again, that's why I can't get the whole book into this 1 hour show.
Of course. Yeah. By the way, do you have to go or you I know we're going.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. I've got another 5 minutes. I told someone
cool.
I'd be 10
so
minutes
a couple
late,
last things on that then. So
Sure.
one, the other thing that I love about things like that, the things that evolve kind of play and practice and failure, they sort of circle back to attention, because I always tell people, like, if you want to know what real attention feels like, work on a skill that requires like your body in some way, right? A tactile skill.
Yep.
If you're really trying to learn it, you will not be anxious or depressed or anything during that time frame, because you can't be. It requires that attention. And I think it's such a good, it's almost like a hack in a way, right? Like when I'm sitting there right now and I'm trying to get the solo down to Piano Man, right? That's what I'm trying to,
I love it.
Trying to get the whole, I've got most of the song, but there's the really fast part in the front. And then there's the solo where I'm like, I'm not quite there yet. But when I'm doing that, there's just no space for other bullshit in my head. Because it just requires so much attention, right? I'm like, where my hands go and remembering the sequence and everything.
That is the magic of presence.
Yeah, right. But it's like this.
That is the magic.
The skill stuff to me it's like a little hack into that of like that.
Absolutely.
Like feel what that feels like. And it's such a great window into it. So the last thing I want to ask you is what happens to creativity with AI? As AI expands, because man, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because it's like, I work in marketing as the comms director. I have to write a lot, or at least I did. And now I can like just feed prompts into ChatGPT and basically gets me 90% of the way there. I edit it a little bit. And so by doing that, it's certainly like removing some of the lower level jobs out there, which was like, kind of bitch work stuff where it's like, well, we don't really need that anymore. Then I think, okay, as it levels up, now it goes away. And and just creativity too, right? I watched a video the other night where a guy he's like, I'm feeding prompts into an AI music generator. And then I'm trying to write a song that's the same, based on the same prompts, right? Like write a movie score that's about da, or a movie song that's about this. And he was like, can you tell which one's which? I got them all wrong. Which one was AI versus the real person?
Of course.
Right?
Of course you did. That stuff's so good right now. It's so good.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And it's only going to get better. So, I think we used to think, well, as provided the robots don't all kill us, we thought, okay, it's going to take care of all the bullshit, and then we're going to be free to do art and everything. But it's like, yeah, but what if they're more creative, right? Like what do we do? I really am.
How about 10-80-10? So what I mean by that is you do the first 10%. The robots do the shitty, messy middle, and then you come in and polish at the end, because you're adapting it to the very specific nuanced thing. When there's the CEO for Anthropic at the World Economic Forum said by 2026 or 7, I think I'm getting this quote right.
Okay,
2026 or 7, we will have AI that are better than most humans at most tasks.
Yeah, I believe it.
Start to think about that, process that for a second. Within 1 to 2 years, systems that are better than most humans at most tasks. So if you do a task, you better start to pay attention, because your livelihood is about to get reinvented. Therefore, what ought we pay attention to? Things that are not tasks necessarily, like going from 0 to 1. If an AI is great at taking this from 1 to 100, your ability to frame the prompt about the movie score or about the XYZ, that is an absolutely beautiful human element. And you know what? It's part of what we were put on this planet to do. It's one of the things that separates us from all the other species, our ability to create, to be creative. So this 0 to 1, or the first 10%, ought to be really interesting. And then also the last one, you said it before. You said, I need to create a prompt. It generates it and it's mostly correct. And then you're going to go in and polish a few things. 10-80-10. What if you start to think about a lot of the things in your life? Is that, boy, that would be cool. It would free you up to be able to shift how you spend your time and how you direct your attention and what it is that you work on and why.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah. And there's certain things too that I'm like, okay, it still can't paint a painting, right? Or like build a building necessarily, that kind of stuff. So
Totally.
I just think it's such a fascinating, it's going to be really interesting in the next few years, like where this goes.
Well, the funny thing is then when you tell the AI, which actually is a robot, to actually, then it does do those things.
Right.
Which is also not that far away.
I know.
And, and there are a lot of things that are still like that physicality that in real life, that IRL, there's still a lot of magic in there, which is unmistakably, unequivocally human, right? That's a great place to spend some time.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll end it there. Chase, thanks so much, man. Great to meet you. Loved the book. Never Played Safe.
Thank you.
Great stuff. If people want to connect with you, where can they do it?
Yeah, I'm everywhere on the internet. Just Chase Jarvis, Chase, like the bank. Jarvis, Jarvis. Yeah. Never Played Safe is the new book. If you're interested in creativity, my previous book was called Creative Calling. They end up working nicely together. But I'd love to have you join my community. I'm Chase Jarvis everywhere on the internet, and I am pretty prolific. I'm always putting stuff out there in the world. So love to have you come join the crew.
Awesome. Thanks, Chase. Really appreciate it, man.
Thanks again. Grateful for your time. Thanks so much for having me on the show. Love what you do.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. We'll see you. Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation, and an Ironclad original series sponsored by Mechanix Wear. If you want to learn more about Chase, you can find him at chasejarvis.com. And if you want to learn more about the Navy SEAL Foundation, you can find us at navysealfoundation.org, or you can text On the X to 60104 to join our subscriber list. Lastly, it is our 25th anniversary at the foundation this year, and we have a thing going on right now. If you sign up as a $25 a month or more recurring donor, we're going to send you a free t-shirt, 25th anniversary t-shirt. So you can check that out. If you go to our website, you get a little pop-up and you can sign up for that. So thanks for listening. See you next time.
For the past 15 years, we've been known as the turnkey branded content company, right? That means that we take brand and content to the next level. So if you're Garmin and you want us to shoot your new watch at the side of a cliff in the middle of Colorado, we source the location, we get the permits, we find the talent, we get the side-by-sides. We make everything happen for a world-class piece of branded content. And that's really where we've kind of cut our teeth. And about 5 years ago, we launched Ironclad Originals as the second part of Ironclad. So you've got the branded content on one side, and you've got Ironclad Originals. And what Ironclad Originals is, intellectual properties by way of franchises that can start as a podcast, build an audience, and develop into a film or series that can be licensed or purchased by a major streaming platform. So to date, we've launched 8 Ironclad Originals. Every one of them has topped the charts on Spotify and Apple and have grown to today over 5 million downloads a month. We're doing partnerships with Warner Brothers, major sporting networks, and many, many other brands to bring their product to our audience by way of our podcast. Now, you may have seen some of our podcasts with Andy Stumpf, Vincent Vargas, Dom Rosso. We're launching 4 more this year. So these Ironclad Originals are going to continue to evolve, continue to grow, and by the end of this year, our target is to have 10 million unique audience members on the Ironclad Original platform. Now, these two sides of Ironclad are really yin and yang to one another, and you can come in on either side of that. One note is, the branded content and the original content has come together for one more unique offering called a brand podcast. We've taken all of our expertise on the Ironclad Original side, mixed with the service-based business of the branded content, and now we're providing branded podcasts. That's a turnkey podcast that we can launch from 0 to full scale within 60 days. And we'll do 52 weeks of unique content where we build the studio, build the brand, book the guest, edit the shows, host the shows, engineer the shows, take everything that makes an Ironclad Original unique, apply it to a brand, and build owned content for our brand partners that can take a brand to a whole nother level. You know, as we close this out, I just want you to think, this is something that you should be doing, whether it's with or without Ironclad. We truly believe that you should be creating brand podcasts. We truly believe you need the best branded content in the world. We truly believe you need a partner that can tell your story at an elite level. Okay, so this is something that you need to be doing with or without Ironclad. But one thing about Ironclad is that we are drinking our own Kool-Aid. We believe in this so much, we're investing in originals. We are testing the waters. We have the connections happening on this side of the house. We're proven and tested on the brand side. And we promise that if you come to us, we will bring all those resources together and bring them to you. And we will be an extension to your team to make you operate at an elite level. So those are the things that we're offering here at Ironclad. We're so excited. Thank you so much for all your support. We love you all.